grandchildren of the world's first skyscrapers, because these young men came here right after the fire with these bold ideas. You know, I'm going to build skyscraping buildings 15, 16 stories tall. You can't build with masonry then, because the wall will become so heavy it will collapse under its own weight. So one, you have to build on a steel frame. Two, no idiot is going to walk up and down 15 or 16 stories all day, so you have to have an elevator. And three, this is Chicago, where we tried to burn the joint down, so you need to have a fireproof building. Those are the three attributes of what makes a skyscraper. But there's one fourth very important one, which you appreciate rather than see. It was enunciated beautifully by a man named Louis Sullivan, who was one of those young architects who came here. 18 years old in 1873, and he comes to Chicago. And he pronounced the skyscraper to be a proud and soaring thing. And when you look at those buildings, do try to appreciate there is so much more going on there than just adding a floor. Okay, now I'm tall. The entire design of a building is of one piece. It's a very bold, kind of brassy, in-your-face statement of power and determination and oneness. And that is the concept that Chicago gave to the history of architecture right here after the fire. Now the 800-pound gorilla in the room, down the river, big dark building, is the Willis Tower. I'm a Chicagoan, so I probably will slip and call it the Sears at some point. It is the second tallest building in the United States. It is 1,451 feet, which is about 445 meters tall. It has 110 stories, 100 elevators, 16,000 windows. The building actually washes itself. It has motorized cars that circle the building that travel like in ruts on the building, and the cars go around. It has its own postal code. At Valentine's Day, they have to hire 9 people just to deliver all the flowers that come. And the days are 3.5 minutes longer at the top than at the ground because of the disparity in the horizon line. Now, to the right front, you get to look into the canyons of Chicago. You'll see a tall building with a statue on top, and then a kind of a green, glassy, garagey looking building hanging off of it. The tall building and then the glassy building are actually together as a unit. That's the Chicago Board of Trade. The glassy building is the addition, which was put on in 1980, because like with the post office, the old building from 1930 by Holabird and Root could not sustain all of the computerization by which trading is now done. So they added on to it. You see the pyramid roof. The statue on top is Ceres, who is the Roman goddess of the harvest. The Chicago Board of Trade is almost as old as the city. It's from 1848. The city is 1837. And it is our equivalent of the New York Stock Exchange. But we are an agrarian part of the United States, not a financial part. And so instead of trading coinage and gold and precious metals, here we trade wheat, corn, oats, and until recently one of my favorite words in the English language, pork bellies. This is also where the concept of derivatives, which is betting on the future up and downness of prices, was invented here at the Board of Trade. Made a lot of people wealthy, made a lot of people wish they had never set foot on a trading floor, but it all came with the Board of Trade. But ahead of us again, we'll revisit that we have the royal couple of the river. You have the Willis Tower, tall, dark, handsome, with big shoulders, and right next to it you have 311 South Wacker Drive, the cute girl next door who's pretty in pink. She is from 1991, done by Cohn Pedersen Fox. They are the people who did the beautiful Diva building, the curving green glass building. So we know they're very sharp architects. So they're given a commission. Good news, you got a commission. Bad news, you have to build it right next to the Sears Tower. But they're smart. They don't try to out-Sears the Sears. They do something different. One building is tall and dark and rectilinear. The other one is polygonal and pink. During the daytime, everybody is happy to agree that the Willis is the biggest kid on the block. But at night, when the Willis does not look very dramatic, check out the top of this building. The top is what we call crenellated, meaning it looks like a castle. And again, you'll see them as soon as the bridge gets out of the way. There are these three big tubs on the top of that building. They contain 1,600 fluorescent lights that are so bright that it looks, Chicagoans call it the White Castle. The architects called it a lantern. A lot of people think it looks like an engagement ring because it's kind of like a diamond. So bright, they sometimes have to dim it for migrating birds. But the Willis, designed by Bruce Graham of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, could not have done it, however, without his partner in crime, the structural engineer Fazlur Khan. Because Fazlur Khan was the first one to solve the problem of a tall building that was open and empty inside for lots of rent, but also very strong in the wind. Now he thought, you know, in theory, a skyscraper would be like the tube that's in, let's say, the middle of your paper towels, right? Because that's all empty inside. They said, you know, a tube, an empty tube, is like one pencil. Stand it up, and in a big wind, what's going to happen? It's going to tip over, it's going to break, it's going to twist. But a bunch of pencils together are very strong. Aha moment. Here you have square tubes. 9 of them, like in a tic-tac-toe board. You can count them. 2 stop at 50, 2 at 65, 3 at 90, 2 go all the way up. So now what have you got? You have a building which is empty inside, a lot of room to rent. Phenomenally strong, because the tubes are leaning on each other for strength. That jagged top resists what's called the vortex effect of the wind, the effect of the wind that would normally grab it and try to twist the building. Makes it look kind of like cigarettes there at the top. But you don't go the other way and make a building which is perfectly rigid. That's bad too, that's bad engineering. And the Willis is actually meant to sway as much from plumb as a meter, which is over 3 feet. Now that's a lot. It's never moved that much, but you can be in the building and it is in fact swaying in the wind. How do you know? If you go into the bathroom, you're standing there, you look in the toilets, and the water is going back and forth like this because it's moving with the building. You're going to get a chance to see the Willis again between the brown building on the right and the turquoise building ahead of it. As those buildings part, look up to the right. You get the full force of it because this is the western facade that goes all the way up, 110 uninterrupted floors. You can see that beautiful jagged pattern that they came up with. And then at 103, you will see 4 kind of glass boxes sticking off the side. Those are called the ledges. Those were put in a few years ago by Skidmore. I don't know if anybody on the boat has ever had the fun of going up into a really tall building. If you do, your overwhelming feeling is really one of expansiveness. It's kind of like, I can see really far. Until you step into one of those ledges, because the floor is glass. And you look straight down and you see what Chicago looks like, 103 floors beneath you. Some people do that and they're sad that they did. Kids though will love it. They lie down on it and they wave to the people on the ground. Over on the left, where you see these kind of tunnels down at river level, this is and has been since the 1840s. This is the railroads. They were here early. Of course, they got a lot of the really good land. And if this was 1856, we would be down here. You'd have trains pulling in, just lodging their goods onto boats pulling in, putting the train, finished goods, raw goods, making this big crisscross pattern. By the 1920s, really, that was long gone, and we were also full in the loop on the right. We needed more room. What did they do when they needed more room? They looked over here where they had torn down all these warehouses and thought, aha, air rights over the railroad tracks. How did they do that? They slam down into bedrock where they can anchor them. And here I'm giving away the fact I'm not an engineer. What I refer to as industrial strength nails. Those are called caissons. They're these huge kind of big poles or nails that go all the way down into bedrock. They put 30 or 40 of them down. They form a podium. And on that they put the foundation of the building and up they go. And you can see all along here you've got these massive buildings which are essentially sitting on roofs over railroad tracks. Now, between the brown building and the massive building right to the next of it, I want you to think back. Remember that kind of garagey looking building that I asked you to look at, that I identified as the addition to the Board of Trade? That was done in 1980 by an architect named Helmut Jahn, but that was not his first attempt at the drawing. His first attempt did get built, but nowhere near the Board of Trade. It got built, it's right here between these two buildings. It's this dark blue building with the silvery corners. And look at the front. Look at that beautiful frozen waterfall. When Helmut showed the drawing of this to the people at the Board of Trade, they said, "We don't like it. It looks like a cash register." So, he gave them the kind of garage-looking building. Canny man though, he saved the drawing. And in 1987, when he was commissioned to design a tall office building, he tweaked it a little bit. Gave Chicago that stunning building. He also did the United Terminal at O'Hare, if any of you have ever been there. The building in the front, 2 North Riverside Plaza, is the traditional home of the Chicago Daily News, the great rival of the Tribune. This is from 1929. William Holabird, one of its architects, described it as a cubist sphinx. 2 great attributes of Art Deco: one, cubism, very geometric, like a lot of the painting by Picasso and Braque. Sphinx, because in the 1920s, Howard Carter had rediscovered King Tut's tomb. Everybody wanted Egyptian things. To the right of it, you see the building that's 2 shades of gray. If you look quickly at the top, you'll see all that metalwork. That actually covers the entire roof. That is the kind of lower part of the Boeing building, which is from 1990, designed by Ralph Johnson of Perkins and Will. As we come out from under the bridge, you'll notice that the Boeing building is shaped like a capital letter L. You have this long tower, and then you have this small piece that sticks out. Well, we remember, railroad tracks over here. Big problem. The railroad tracks turn. They could not sink a caisson. How do we do this? Well, what they did was to use the principle in a diving board, which is to put a horizontal element off of a vertical one. And the lower piece here is literally hanging off of the tall tower. All covered on the roof of this building is that metal, which are called trusses. It uses the oppositional forces of physics. What I would do if I was going to pull you, if you were lying down and I was going to pull you up, that is what that building is doing all the time. And the small piece is actually suspended off of the tall tower. Shows that architects need engineers. They have great dreams and they never worry if a building that they design will stand up. They always say, "Oh, the engineer will figure that out," and they always do. Architects deal with a lot of restraints, and not the least restraint now is the need to be environmentally conscious, because the worst source of pollution in the world is buildings, not cars, but buildings. For instance, the Willis Tower, 10,000 people work in there. It uses enough energy for 45,000 people, so that's just untenable. The program in the U.S. that kind of makes and sets and enforces the standards is called LEED, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. And you get rankings for either a new building, which is called Shell and Core, or you can also retrofit older buildings and bring them up to code. And in a minute, we're going to see an older building that has been retrofitted. But one more time, we're going to go past Wolf Point here. Now I'll tell you that the people in the Chicago Sun-Times, when they moved there, they were guaranteed in perpetuity views of the river. How are you going to do that and build 3 buildings? Well, Cesar Pelli, who has the soul of a poet, he is an architect, but the soul of a poet, has said, "I'm putting in my 3 buildings. They're going to be long and very narrow." And he said, "You watch. My buildings will touch the ground lightly." So we shall see. 3 buildings there. To the right of it is the building from 1930, designed by Alfred Shaw, that has been retrofitted. That's the Merchandise Mart. They completely gutted it in the 1980s and changed all of the plumbing, the air conditioning, the heating, everything about it to get a LEED silver rating. And you know how there's an old expression about there are no second acts in American life? Well, this building has had 3 lives. It's like a cat. It keeps coming back. Originally in 1930, it was built at the behest of the will of the great retail merchant Marshall Field. Marshall Field was tremendously wealthy. He distrusted his son and skipped him completely in the will, left the money to his grandsons, but not until they were 50 50 years old. Marshall Field III was 13 when his father died. His grandfather died. So the money was going to sit in that will, in that trust for a long time. Field said, build buildings. It was originally supposed to be for wholesale purposes. That didn't work very well because it was finished in the middle of the Depression. I remember it from the 50s and 60s as a place where interior decorators would come to pick out furniture, rugs, carpeting. Now, it is Silicon Valley under one roof. 6,000 technical jobs in that building alone, 900 of which are from eBay, and just came to Chicago. Behind the the red and green building that says Chicago School, you see sticking up a modern, very tall building from 2009 designed by Pickard Chilton. That's 300 North LaSalle, reminding me kind of a diamond. It has that beautiful faceted side to it. This is the only building on the cruise that has a LEED Platinum rating. That's the highest rating. It gets sad because it's not only used recycled and reclaimed materials, it actually takes in water from the river, sprays that on the elements inside which are creating heat, which is not only the heating but also the air conditioning and the compression. Cools all that down and then cleans the water and returns clean water into the Chicago River. Now along on the right, you can see this is, again, happy Chicagoan, but this is not very pretty to look at. Well, not for much longer, because all this is going on here, we are now in the first of a 2-summer plan to convert 6 blocks from down where the Diva is to almost where we started. These 6 blocks are all going to be converted into 6 separately themed riverfront active, interactive destinations. There's going to be a cafe, there's going to be a place where small boats can pull in, an ecology museum, a fishing hole, a wading pool, very family oriented. The idea here is for Chicagoans, their friends, tourists, to come down to the riverfront, have a gelato, walk around, people watch, and just enjoy the proximity of an extraordinary natural resource right here in the city. And they're doing 3 blocks this summer, and then they'll finish 3 blocks next summer. Behind the orange umbrellas, if you look up, this is a modern building which is currently inhabited by the American Bar Association. Look how the building is kind of standing on stilts. It almost seems to be hovering over its spot. Has that big, glassy, almost aquarium tank of a lobby. You'll see that in a lot of modern buildings, and we couldn't see it when we looked at some of the other ones, but you see it really well there. We have 3 buildings that are quite identifiable to Chicago, either by dint of their design or by architects. The first is the first of 2 towers, which Chicagoans love to refer to as the corn cobs. This is Marina City. You remember River City? This is Marina City, also by Bertrand Goldberg, but a little earlier, between 59 and 67. They are now condominiums. Because the towers are obviously round, the apartments inside, the condos inside, are shaped like pieces of pie, wedges of pie, because you can't have a square apartment in a round building. Bertrand was the student of Mies van der Rohe, and right next door, the dark brown building, that is the only building on the cruise, only by Mies, a complete Mies production. It was finished in 1981 for IBM. It's now occupied by the Langham Hotel and the American Medical Association. Now, Mies had died in 1969, but he finished the drawing of the building. And then, months before he died, he insisted upon being put into a wheelchair in February, wheeled out to here, because in the land of Mies, the actual spot where the building went down, and then its orientation, was as important as the design of the building. It was the whole thing, the gestalt of the whole project. And this is what Mies is about. This building is rigorous, it is intellectual, it is serene, it is perfect. And that's what Mies was attempting. Now next to it, the third of the buildings to talk about, for anybody who can read, it will become eminently clear whose building this is. This is from 2009, designed by Adrian Smith for the Donald. This is the second tallest building in Chicago. And here we're going to talk about what makes the tall building tall. If you want to take pictures of it, the best pictures will be from out toward the lake. Here we're going to talk about the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitats and their rules. And about 6 months after the Trump was topped off, they changed their rule. And they said you can start counting the stories of a building at the lowest level of pedestrian access. This has 4 floors below street grade, and it suddenly became 4 floors taller because of the change in the rules. They didn't have to move a single brick or a piece of stone or nothing. It just grew 4 stories. It is now it's all occupied, I think, except for 3 or 4 units, the most notorious of which is the penthouse, the entire top, $32 million. But Donald has said he will negotiate. To the right of the big flag, which is on the Wrigley Building, this is Tribune Tower. Note that busy top. That building was the result of an international competition won by Howells and Hood out of New York. Over 250 architects participated. Many of them were from Europe. So a lot of people were hoping we'd get a really forward-looking, very different kind of design. But Colonel McCormick, who owned the paper, said, my building, my prize, my paper, my money, my decision. He liked Gothic, and so what Howells and Hood gave him was essentially an Art Deco skyscraper wearing a Gothic hat. The Gothic hat was inspired by the Butter Tower of the cathedral in Rouen, France. Normally, those elbow-like elements you see on the side, which are called flying buttresses, they would be pushing and supporting the tower. But because this is all architectural doodads, these flying buttresses themselves are actually being supported by steel beams beneath them. So it's completely reversed. We have the University of Chicago Bleacher Center on the left. This is business and evening classes. The classrooms are where there are no windows, so the students will not have any kind of temptation to look out at the river instead of at the professor. And across from it, the building with the peacock way on top, Americans will recognize as being the symbol of NBC, and that is indeed the NBC Tower. It's from 1989, designed by Adrian Smith. When he went through a period of designing here in Chicago where he was entranced by buildings from the 1920s, these great tall towers. And so there he's kind of reinterpreting Art Deco from the 20s for the 1980s. Behind it you see a clutch of high-rises. That is collectively known as Streeterville, another residential area. Although those people, you can see they're kind of far from the river. They're not looking at the river, they're looking at the lake. But nothing would be out there were it not for this bridge that we're about to go under, the Columbus Drive Bridge. This is from the mid-1980s when the city of Chicago really kind of cleaned up its act with huge public works projects, straightening out a crooked Lakeshore Drive and putting in this bridge. Because just like the DuSable Bridge, for a long time these two banks of the river were not joined. The land over here on the left had once been primo property. This was the mouth of the Port of Chicago, owned by the first mayor of Chicago, who actually enlisted Abraham Lincoln to get favorable legislation passed in Springfield, the state capital, so that he didn't have to worry about things like taxes while he was exploiting this land. But again, by the 1950s, there was a wreck, run down lumber yards, warehouses, just very foul. So the city hired an architectural firm to come in here and to design an urban plan for along here. This one is very reactive and interactive with the river, because you'll note all along here we have lights, so it's all very nicely illuminated at night. Full of a lot of benches that are being occupied right now by people who are just kind of watching what's going on in the river. Outdoor cafe. And then just a little bit farther up where you see the flags and you see what looks like a sculpture. That's actually a fountain, which for reasons that I don't know, they have turned off. Possibly because it's a holiday weekend and they did not want anybody in a somewhat disabled position, inebriated or such, playing in the fountain. It actually still looks good because it was designed by an architect, so it has a kind of an architectural feel. The triangular building, though, right on the bank, that is called the water cannon. And at the top of every hour, right at the top of every hour for 10 minutes, it shoots a jet of water out and shoots it so hard and fast that it actually goes in a big arc over very often to the other side. This is why we time the cruise when we do, because of course you did not get a raincoat when you got on. So we have to be careful when we go under. Behind it here, the red building with the green accents is another residential building called Riverview. This is also by Jim DeStefano. So we're all built up along here in one of the many residential areas that dot the city of Chicago. As we've been out, you have and will see the homes of about 45,000 people who live right here along the river. But all of a sudden you'll notice on the left we have, grass. We have a big old hole in the development there. And that is the great blown opportunity of the city of Chicago. That was to have been what the Council on Tall Buildings refers to as a mega tall building. That is over 2,000 American feet, over 700 international meters. It was designed by a Spaniard named Santiago Calatrava. You'll notice that the size of the land is not very much. That was to be a 150-story building. So it was very tall and thin. Calatrava thought it was kind of like a plume of smoke. They got 27 caissons into the ground and spectacularly ran out of money. And there it sits. For a long time, we have two groups of tourists with us today who are from the Republic of Ireland. And for a long time, the State Bank of Ireland owned the mortgage on there because the developer is Irish. They were able to get rid of that this past spring. And an American group has purchased the debt. But the only debt that was purchased for $150 million is what they call the active debt. That would be the debt for the designer, the people who put the caissons in. It doesn't even touch the civil suits that have been filed because of all the people who put 10% down on condominiums that don't exist. So I don't think anything's going to happen there for a while. We do have a lovely building out here, though. That's Lake Point Tower, which is over here on the left, from 1968 by Schipperite and Heinrich. They were students of Mies van der Rohe. I think you can kind of see that in much of the design, although it's much rounder and has a kind of a different feel than Mies's building did. They have great views out here, and not the least of those views looks out on Navy Pier, which is just to the left front. Navy Pier is the most popular in terms of attendance tourist attraction in the state of Illinois. It was accounted for by the Burnham Plan, but it never really took off as a commercial pier. We never could decide what to do with it until the early 1990s when they decided to turn it into kind of a tourist trap. It's very like Fisherman's Wharf is in San Francisco. You know, a lot of souvenir t-shirts, a lot of food on a stick. There's a children's museum, a stained glass museum, a lot of amusement park rides, and the most prevalent of those is this Ferris wheel that you see there. That is by no means the tallest Ferris wheel in the world. It's about the height of a 14-story building. But it's an homage to the first Ferris wheel in the world, which was from the 1893 World's Fair, the Columbian Exposition here. Paris had had a World's Fair just a few years before they got the Eiffel Tower. So we wanted something good. Enter George Washington Ferris and the Ferris wheel. The first Ferris wheel could have over 2,200 people on it. Imagine going up 30 stories in a Ferris wheel in 1893. You had to be pretty gutsy to do that. There was a bar on every car, just to give you additional strength and courage while you were out. As we come around here, if you will look first ahead of you and then to the right up in front of us, you're going to see what look like kind of iron gates that are in the water here. And if you look just ahead of it, you'll see a spot of yellow, and that's a boat. This is the locks, L-O-C-K-S, not the fish, but locks. And these were put in after a threat of a lawsuit by our neighbors on Lake Michigan. Because when we turned the river around and the river ran out of the lake, the river is lower, and they were afraid that we would drain the lake. So in order to avoid a lawsuit, we put these locks in, these big sort of iron wings. Those open and close as river traffic demands it. And you go into there and then they adjust the water levels so they're the same, and then they open the end of the locks. And this is run by it's actually the Army Corps of Engineers. And now we have our second great photographic opportunity. If you look to the left-hand side, there it is. This was voted, it has regularly been voted by the International Institute of Architects as one of the two most fascinating and memorable skylines in the world. The other one is Singapore. Singapore, however, is all new buildings. Here in Chicago, when you look, you'll see that they're old buildings kind of dotted in there. This is a great spot. People love to use this as wallpaper for a selfie along here. But I also like to say, because this is the holiday weekend and we have a lot of Chicagoans with us, this is your hometown. And you can see this every day if you want to, and you have every right to be very proud of this beautiful city. I'm going to have a drink while you're all gabbing and taking pictures, and then we'll talk a very little bit and go in. Captain Tom is doing a really lovely job here. He's turning really slowly. So the pilot house, and then you'll get more perspective. Tall Buildings and Urban Habitats has laid down the rule, and they say you stop counting or you stop deciding what tall is where the architect stopped. So on the Willis Tower, which has those rabbit ears on it, those are television antennas. They do not count. Bruce Graham didn't design those. He stopped.